Good evening, everyone. This is our last internship class, and it has been a whirlwind, hasn't it? So we're talking about competency folios, and I'm not really sure what we can do if you have that title like communication, and you have two things under that, like your skip and your open-ended and maybe an APSL, and you have completed what's required, but one of them is under the title and the other two are indented showing, and it looks like there's only two submissions.
Right, and I can name it whatever I want to name it, and the narrative within it will, that I always put this addresses the app, so blah, blah, blah. But maybe towards the end, so I don't want to waste up any of you guys' time, I can share my screen so I can kind of show you what I mean, like when you look at the screen.
Well, what the evaluator is going to see, I think, is what I see. Because I could, if I was employed to be an evaluator also, I could do that now and tell you, yes, this is okay. That's just not my role. I'm a CC2. That's what I choose to do. I really like working with students, trying to help them. I wish it wasn't even pass fail, but it is pass fail. We got to grade people no matter what, right? So anyway, I hate to say that one of the alternatives is to go back and put last semester's stuff indented under like the others are. But another option might be at the very top of your folio, there's a general statement that says Competency Folio. If you click on that, there is a place to make a comment, and you might choose your wording carefully and make a comment there. Final evaluator, please find my first submissions from fall 18 under the broad heading of each competency. I mean, something that tells them what you did. Mm-hmm. So I don't want you to do a lot of extra work, and it's not for me. I mean, I get the feeling sometimes that people think it's just this old biddy wants it just the way she wants it. But it's not that. It's that when all the students who are finishing up this semester, when those roll by the final evaluator, they're looking to see that stuff in order so that they can grade 21 competencies for all bunches of you. So,
right.
And if you're graduating, the people that are graduating, those people also are looking at every one of the evidences. They're looking at the school dispositions. They're looking at the competency analyses, and they're looking at the folio. I mean, before they send it to the graduate office and say they have completed, they literally lay their eyes on it to make sure that people like me are doing my job, that you really have done the work and the work is available and archived.
Well, I will definitely go back and look at it. I feel like at this point, it is what it is. It's just too exhausting to try to go back and start from the beginning. I'm just not going to do that. But I will take your advice as far as labeling and just kind of see how it goes. It's just, just frustrating for me. It's just in the beginning, if that's not, you know how that, well, anyway.
Well, no, I don't. This is the first time, the reason that the classes got scrambled, and I'm sure you miss the person that was your CC2. I hear from my people I had to start with, because we promised them we'd be with them to the end. And then we lost people because of the flood and because of the hurricane. And so classes had to be reorganized in order to, to meet numbers. And so that's really what happened. And so we just tried to do the best we could and not harm, the old doctor thing, do no harm. And so we were trying to do no harm, but it's harmful to let you get to the end and then discover there's a problem. So I tend to be a red flag person and wave my flag and say, something's wrong here, let's fix it. And so we can get to the end. And I do still have a couple of people that I can't see their folios, and I've been waving the flag since January.
Oh.
So that's going to get fixed sometime, I guess, because if you get to the end of 605 and you don't have a competency folio, you're going to be in 699 until you get it. Because I have nothing, I have no recourse. You have to have a folio.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Other questions? How about, yeah, go ahead.
Dr. Todd, I've been making the corrections that for the CAAP 1 that you and Dr. Todd, and I think you mentioned it last night, the town hall had kind of muddied the waters a little bit, because I was one of the people that did include the qualitative, because I remember in the town hall talking about the 3 columns and having your North Carolina teacher working conditions, then another survey that you did for low areas, and then qualitative. So
it's okay. It's okay. You can use the book. It's just, later.
So I've removed that and put it down into task 2, and then I'll have to work on it from there. But I'm still having a difficult time understanding the portion or how to word or pull out into my narrative the part about the diversity and equity, and understanding how, like in some parts of the 5 that we're addressing, I kind of understand the equity and diversity. But when we're talking about facilities and we're talking about like one of my low places is digital resources in the classroom. How do I talk about that so that I am addressing the diversity and equity? That's just an example, but just in general, that's the part that I'm having trouble with.
That's a good example too. And I think with the, and I will, before I say what I was going to say about technology, I would say that you don't have to write epistles about this. You do just need to make sure that you keep sort of pricking the surface of it a little bit. And I would say that technology is really important, that especially in low achieving high poverty schools, that we have good technology, because that is one thing that will get the students very far behind, and it will just increase the at-risk potential for those students, because when they get to high school and their peers in the chemistry class whip out their advanced technology calculator and they whip out their whatever the device will be by the time they get there, some of those kids will have been using them forever, and others won't have had one in their hands ever. And so I can see that you might be able to talk about the push for technology so that every child, and I see that with the Chromebook thing, where people are, buying the Chromebooks. I know my own son, who is an artist and works for a technology company here in Greensboro. He says he couldn't believe that he could buy a Chromebook for the cost of, it was just dirt cheap. And it has all the functions of a computer, except, it doesn't have power. But you can understand the concepts, you can get the ideas, and so can you see that you could?
I see that. That makes a lot of sense. So let me ask you this one.
Oh dear.
For facilities, one area the main area that was low for us was that the school is clean and well maintained.
Well, I'm not sure that I could really do a lot with that, except that I think it's important for you to have a clean, and not just sanitary, but a welcoming school,
Hmm.
bright, good lighting, all of that, um, for students. But I think that one is harder, and I think you'd have to maybe push on it, and maybe you won't say anything about that there.
So I don't necessarily have to speak to it on every single one. It's when it naturally fits and I can, in the narrative, naturally address that, as long as it's being addressed in some way
I
in
think
the
that's
task.
fair. Yes,
Okay.
I think that's fair. It's just a matter of the culture of the school. For some of these kids, that's the best place they're going to be all day, every day, especially our homeless kids, you know. There, I think, well, no, I haven't told this class, but I had a kid that ran away from home. Of course, I was at a high school, and this was a kid that was in the top 10 of her class. I think she graduated number 3. And she ran away from home to go live with some boy whose mother allowed it. And he later decided that he was going to move on, and she had no place to go. And no one knew that this had all happened. And for about 4 or 5 weeks, she lived at the airport. And she said it was clean, and she could get some food, and she had a place that she could plug her computer in. And so she literally lived there for a while. So, I think about kids that are homeless and they come, and to have a clean, bright place. I think in facilities, something did just hit my mind. Some schools have libraries that are the most beautiful places in the school, and others are struggling to have the bare minimum. And it's because they don't have the money. I was in a high school, I was so blessed. I was once in a high school where the band budget, now this was back in the late 80s to late, into the 90s, and their band budget was $40,000 that the parents, I mean, that's the band boosters budget, 40,000 bucks. You know, that's something about facilities too, because they wanted it shiny, they wanted it spotless, they wanted places to hang those uniforms they had bought when the district said you can't have them for another 3 years because it's on a rotating cycle and your money's not available yet. And they said, we want new uniforms. And so they just sold a little fruit from Florida and a few candy bars, and they had new uniforms. And they wanted their kids to have healthier meals, and so they bought a portable kitchen that was pulled by a tractor trailer. It was a trailer it was a tractor trailer, but the trailer was a kitchen. Oh, for gosh sakes. I mean, see, that's a booster club that'll start wagging the dog if you're not careful. You just have to hold them tight. But, that's different. That's a different thing than an inner city school with some really struggling kids. The climate of the school is so important, that it's welcoming. So some of the facilities, you might be able to come up with some things if you just sort of poke a little bit. Yeah. Are there other areas you had concerns about? The main thing I'm concerned about is that in task 1, everyone, it sounds like I'm saying this over and over, and I probably am, but everyone must address all 5 areas. And when you start looking at what's negative, and the positives and the negatives, make sure you don't narrow it too narrow, because you've got to have something in all 5 areas to carry forward into the rest of your work. I don't want you to cut it short just in order to get finished. Yes, it's okay if you just have one recommendation, but two would be good because you might lose one when you do your next analysis, if that makes sense. See, it's hard. In retrospect, it's easy to see that it makes sense. But when some old woman is telling you and you have too much to do already, it's easy to short circuit and then find out that it really is burning you instead of the circuit. So, and the strategies, make sure you have a strategy or two for each of the recommendations. So that's the end of one. And then when you get into two, you're doing that survey using the questions, or even piggybacking. If you're in South Carolina, you can use the advanced ed ones, and then you have access to the North Carolina one just by going on the state website and Google, just request, search for it. You'll see it. And you can grab some of those questions if you'd like. Just so you do the survey and you extract maybe 10, I think Dr. Lamb said 10 to 45 questions. So that's an open field. It depends on your school. If you're in a big high school, you got a lot going on. If you're in a little elementary school with 220 kids, things might be a little different. I don't know. It depends on the area. Mr. Lawhorn says that he is in school heaven where he is. He's in that little, I don't know if it's Fort Mill, but it's that little place right across the border from Charlotte. That's where everybody goes so they can have a bigger house, because South Carolina has less taxes, but they live in Charlotte and make the big bucks there and then take them to South Carolina to, and so everything he wants, he just sort of asks and it just falls from the sky. But that's not most people, So you do the survey, you analyze that data, you see, well, that seems to not be as much of a problem. Well, you still want something to work on, but then you see these low areas and you say, okay, now I'm going to use the qualitative methodology. I'm going to become the ethnographer. I'm going to go in and I'm going to interview people. But be careful in the interviews. You want to have your questions already, because you don't want to be recording a whole bunch of stuff that you have to sort through. I did a qualitative dissertation, and I'll tell you what, it was hell on wheels because analyzing all that data from those principles just drove me crazy. That's why I have white hair now. It was, you want to control the data, and I wasn't good at it that time. So I tell everyone, you've got to control the data. What is it you want them to talk about? And don't let them go into rabbit holes. Talk about that, record that data, get a way to record the data so that when you get through, you know what you've got. You don't have to search through. You don't have to. Some people are trying to just record and then go through and listen to it again. Oh my gosh, that is so time consuming. You don't have enough time for that. Don't do it. Spend the extra time up front getting the questions and knowing what you want to ask everybody. Ask everybody the same questions. So when you get finished, you've got accurate data. Okay, and that's good practice for some of you that are going to get docs.
So,
yeah.
just to make sure, I'm working on CAAP 1, but I haven't turned it in yet. Task 2 is the one that we use the survey we create for.
Yes.
That's 2. So just in one that I have to turn in for this semester, I'm sticking with my insight survey data and analyzing that, picking 2 from each of the 5.
Yes, 2 from each of the 5 with recommendations and strategies to address the recommendations. We're finished with 1.
Perfect. And sorry about earlier, Dr. Tillman. I lost internet connection.
Oh, that's okay. Well, heck, I lost the whole thing. I do not know what happened. It struck terror in my heart when I hit that icon and nothing came up. My drop down over here on the side that I have had for 2.5 years, I guess. I've been doing Zoom sessions, and my meetings didn't come up. It was pretty scary. But anyway, so we went around and came in through the back door, so that's okay. And then on 2, we were talking about, you know, that's where you do the survey, the qualitative stuff. You then look at your, what have you got now versus what you had at the end of 1, and you edit or you confirm. Either it still is a problem or you edit it by saying, well, the teachers now feel that this way, whatever it is, okay? And so at that point, you now have your recommendations and your strategies. So then in 3, that's when you talk about the broad culture, because you now have lots of information. And so you talk about the vision and mission, school leadership, you know, you've got a nice list there. And you want to do that in detail because that's the biggest part. And then the action plan for improving the culture of your school, which is just like the other action plans, you know, set it up the same way. Here's the goal. Here are the activities. Here's who's doing it. Here's the timeline. Here's how we're evaluating it, summative, formative, and summative, you know, that whole thing. Because when you get to 605, you're going to do a school improvement plan. And a school improvement plan has a format. You can't just keep swapping around, you know, it needs to have a format. So, and then you'll be up to the reflection and you're home free. And you'll be ready to do the next one, the last one.
Dr. Todd, I want to go back to Kyra's question. In the CAAP 1, I did all 3 of those parts. So I understood it to take the qualitative out. Can I keep my Survey Monkey in that I've already done, or do I need to pull it out as well and put it in 2?
I would put it in 2 because that's the way it needs to. When the evaluators look at it, that's what they're going to be saying.
So I'm only using the North Carolina Teacher Working Conditions Survey in 1.
Right.
And then, okay, so I can use all of the stuff that I've already gathered. I just need to put it into 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
You haven't done anything or not. It's just, it needs to be in the wrong other place. And the only other option would be to put it, you know, to leave it where it is and then put it in 2 again. But then when you compile the paper, you've got to remove it from one place or the other. So you might as well do it now so you don't have to.
Okay. Okay. I'll do that.
Anything you can do now and not do later, I'm telling you, you're just going to be so excited.
Okay. All right. I can do that.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. China, welcome. You got any ideas of things you need?
Well, just one question, starting on the CAAP. But the question I have is, in my advanced ed data, I think we are allowed in the questioning to take. I guess let me see, phrase it right. When we did the survey, you were allowed to select more than one answer. And so on a lot of the questions in the Coaching Climate Survey, it's 30%, 40% because people were able to choose more than one answer.
Well, we were talking about that, and what we meant was you really should keep the same likely score, because that way you can see a little more diversity in the answers, and it's better that way, because I noticed one person I remember asked the question and had them say yes, no. Well, you really don't get as much information that way as if you let people do a little more fine tuning, because then you see them sort of moving a little differently, you know. I don't think that the yes no is as good.
Okay, yeah, because they were just given several different options to select. So you may have had 4 or 5 people select one thing, 3 or 4 people select the other. So it's like I got 30%, 17%, 4% for the same question. And so, I mean, do I just pick 2 and just go with that? Because there's nothing that's going to be satisfactory based on the way the data, the survey is laid out.
Okay, I would say look at the data and say whatever the figures are and however it's put, if something is less than 75% or so in your situation with the South Carolina stuff, I would say it might be looked at. Now, if the whole thing is that way, then look at the most difficult ones. Don't put yourself in a place of having to do for everything.
Okay, because everything is under 75%. No, I think the highest number I saw was like maybe 35 or 40%, because out of the 30 participants, you're able to choose like 3 or 4 things.
Uh-huh.
So I guess what you're saying is I just pick a couple and just roll with those, or pick the ones that have the lowest and just focus on those instead of trying to just.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I'm just saying, but in task 1, don't narrow the focus too much, because that way when you do the other survey and the interviews, that'll give you something to interview and work with. So it sounds like I'm asking you to do more, but I'm actually asking you to do less. And just for the sake of people that aren't here to ask the question, if you have a stellar school and everything is so hunky-dory that everything is above 95%, then you need to be talking about how are you going to maintain that unrealistic number. I have people giving me 100% on everything except one little thing, and it's 93 or something. And that we have schools like that. But they're few and far between. And I think those of you who are in low performing schools right now and are really struggling to try to figure out what to do, you're really gaining more than if you are in a more easy to deal with situation, because you're not having to dig quite so hard. And I think if you're in a career center, I think that's a great place to be, because you're seeing a completely different view and how people are evaluated there versus hearing your peers talk about their schools. Well, that's a different animal. and you have a hard time with it because you're not always looking for the same thing. You're not concerned so much about their reading and math scores as you are, can they get those certificates so they can get out and get a job. If you can't get them a job, honey, you're not going to be in that school very long.
Exactly. Okay. Well, thank you. That helps. Okay. I'm going to go back to coaching my daughter's softball team.
Okay. Goodbye, coach. Okay. He is in a career technical center, and it is completely different. It's hard to sometimes mesh it into the mold of what we're doing from a different angle. So what other questions do you have, or do you think others might have? Because it says I have we have 2 non-video participants. So if there's somebody out there that would like to ask a question, please do.
Well, Dr. Tillman, and I apologize for being late. My daughters were doing a Bible drill competition at church, and I was trying to hear them.
It's hard to be mom and teacher and student.
It is, especially when your husband travels for a living, so then you don't have a backup. Okay, so just because I kind of caught the tail end as I was in the car coming home, we do a survey for prompt 2 of task 1.
Yes.
But we do the exact same questions. We do the extra questions and the discussion for task 2.
You don't do the survey in task 1.
Because
that was what
for prompt 2 of task 1. Because when I was writing notes from Dr. Lamb,
yes, the
prompt 2 of task 1. Because Dr. Lamb said survey exact same questions to faculty to confirm quantitative data.
So when you look at the rubric that the evaluator is going to be working on, it tells you to do the last thing you have to do for task 1 is to put in the recommendations and for each one of those 5 things and the strategies to address those. Then when you go to task 2, you do the survey, the interviews, and then the final look at the recommendations and strategies.
Okay. Then I'm sorry. I just, when I was taking notes from Dr. Lingham,
Well,
I'm looking at where I wrote it all down.
Chime in on that because
He was saying with prompt 2, task 1, prompt 2, survey exact same questions
okay,
to confirm
here's what's going to
and make recommendation on the date.
If you want to leave it there, you leave it there. But when you get to task 2, it's going to say, well, in fact, I guess I should go and find it and we'll look at it now. That's probably the best thing. Let's see here. When we go to the CAAP, and
because then he was talking about with task 2 is when you actually.
I'm not really talking about his notes. That's why last night I said the town hall sort of muddied the water.
Okay.
That's what I meant by that, because when you look at the CAAP 1, the last thing it says is that you need to make sure you have recommendations on the identified needs, including strategies. Okay, that's the last thing it says there. And when you get to task 2, it says that's where you do the qualitative data. And to collect specific data to help understand staff perceptions of the environment. It says qualitative data collected through surveys, observations, and interviews. And if you look under the description at task 2, that's where it says that.
Okay.
So,
and I guess that was where I was getting confused as I was looking at the rubric and then looking at my notes.
Right. And the notes are correct for what he said.
But if we save that survey for task 2, that would be a smarter way to handle that.
Yeah, it's got to be in task 2. If you want to put it in task 1, that's fine. But in task 2, the reviewer is going to be looking for it.
Okay.
And, as I said to Ms. Rupert, if you leave it in and then do it again, when you compile the paper, one of them's got to be taken out. So
okay,
take it out now and put it in 2.
Okay. So for task 1, that prompt 2 is just taking the data from prompt 1.
That's right. It's
making the recommendations and the strategies to fulfill the recommendations.
Well, it says for prompt 2, it says the candidate will develop a needs assessment based on the results of the data from prompt 1.
Right.
The needs assessment should include, and it tells you what should be included. So,
okay.
And the last thing is the recommendations and strategies.
Okay. So
that's really when you.
Okay, and that makes more sense, honestly.
Yeah. I hope it makes sense.
I mean, in trying to incorporate the survey with that rubric for task 1, like you said, I was a little unclear.
Well, it was confusing. It was confusing, and I think he just misspoke and didn't realize that he was.
Okay.
Because he was going through, and that's right where the line between 1 and 2 meet. And I think that's what it was. He had started talking about 2 and hadn't made it clear that he was in 2.
Okay. And then after our conversation last night, I went back into my surveys and I started, because, with what Dr. Todd was saying so heavily about the diversity and the equity, I was looking through my questions again, and I got questions like that I had not put in the first time, but questions like, my lessons include opportunities for students to express individual creativity, or I provide multiple opportunities for parents, families, and legal guardians to engage in meaningful activities that support student success. Because to me, those questions really fit with the diversity and the equity. Mm-hmm. But initially, I didn't see those fitting empowerment or leadership or resources or facilities. So I put them in empowerment because they're focused on me as a teacher and what I can do. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's good. I think the beautiful thing I think about this program is that when you look at your school and you look at what we want to do, there are some wrong things to do. I'm not going to say that, but there's so much flexibility, and there's many different ways to look at these projects that that sounds perfectly logical to me. If it's logical and it's focused on the topic of climate, that's the whole idea about this big project, is to look at the climate. You know, we've looked at the achievement part, we've looked at empowering teachers, we've looked at the organizational scheduling, all that mess, and now we're looking at the culture of the school, and the culture of the school has to do with a lot of that. And then, you know, we're going to put it all together in the end and do a school improvement.
Because the South Carolina questions are not quite as cut and dry as the North Carolina, if I have a question that I can, like, initially on the surface, it doesn't look like it would fit resources, or it doesn't look like it would fit time, but
you can see how it
rationalize it. I can rationalize it to fit those. Is that okay? Are they going to ding me because the questions aren't specifically resource or time?
They are not. The big deal is when you see those questions in light of your school, what does it mean to you? And
so if I can justify it, I'm okay.
What decisions would you make based on the data in your school from what you know about your school and the data you've gathered? Nobody can tell you that that your school, you are the expert on your school in this, and no evaluator can tell you that what you say about your school is wrong. You're the expert. And that's the way it is when you do your doc, and both of you are probably going to end up there. So it's okay to say, this is what I know.
Well, because some of the questions just don't, like, we have so many questions that are focused on how a teacher teaches, like that are focused on instructional strategies and all of that. And that really just doesn't fit facilities or resources or time. So, like, my questions for those three categories are very small. Like, I don't have that many, but I can see some questions where I could finagle it to fit in there. But I wasn't sure how much room I had to finagle.
Well, I think as I told Ms. Rupert, you don't have to do a large-scale focus on that, but you need to sort of try to pull it in all the areas that you possibly can. Now, on the other hand, I do have students that they will put a heading, diversity, and they will talk about diversity, a paragraph for each one of those topics, because in their school, they see that as really something that's involved with the climate of their school. And so it's a bigger issue for them. And so they're pursuing it. So.
And I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it if that's okay, since I have you. I know that we have to put data in, like in terms of prompt 1. All of my data is paper. So in terms of putting in the questions and all the percentages, I'm having to retype everything. I can't go copy and paste it off of something.
You can't paste it off of advanced ed, the advanced ed questions?
We can't get to it online. We can't see the compilation online.
Well, it's so interesting. Every once in a while, I've gone out there, and for a couple of students, I've been able to wiggle around and find their stuff. And so I can't do that with every student. But
I've searched and I've looked and I've asked my instructional facilitator, and all we have are the paper copies. I can check again and maybe ask someone at the district office level. But I think when I go to Advanced Ed and type in all of my school's information, it tells me I don't have access. And then if I do it by district, I still don't have access.
Okay.
And I mean, it's fine. I've been typing it over. That's just taking time that I could be doing, you know, other stuff.
The principal doesn't have access to his teacher.
Not that he has said. I'll retry again.
Do you understand why I think that is the most ludicrous thing? You're evaluating teachers based on their performance, but you're not willing to share their performance data with the people.
I mean, like, we have total access to the paper copies.
Okay.
But that doesn't.
Can you scan that? Like, I have a copier that if I make a copy, I can scan it and it'll come.
But the problem is, like, this first page is 37 questions. I can only use like half of them.
I see.
So if I scan it, there's going to be a lot, and the questions are all intermixed. So like some of these are empowerment, but some of these are empowerment, some of these are resources, and some of these are resources. They're not separated.
Yes.
Where did they come from though, Eleanor? I mean, how did they get printed in the first place? That seems weird to me.
I'm sure someone at the district office, and I just haven't needed to have the digital until now. So I haven't used it heavily. And I'm worried if I pursue it now, it's going to take longer than just retyping.
Well, I would say this, you're copying, but I would say that before you start, interviewing and somebody hands you the keys to the kingdom, pursue that, go ask your principal, who is it down there at that central office that I can go talk to? Always get their permission to go talk to the central office, because my gosh, some of them are just so concerned when you go to the central office without them knowing, oh my gosh. But find out who that person is and say, I really need to know when I get my school, how do I get that information? Because I might want to massage it a little bit and show some of the things, but not all of it. And then present your case to that person. I was in this graduate course and I had to retype these questions because I had to reorganize them based on what they address. And pulling out the climate questions from this was just terrible for me, and it was time consuming and just make them feel really bad. And then try to figure out where you have to go to get that information, because when you get to be the principal, you want to be able to get your data and you want to be able to do with it as you feel necessary in order to make a difference in your school. And retyping the sucker is not it.
Yeah.
We can all agree that's not it.
My original question was, I need to be able to show, here are the 13 questions that dealt with empowerment. I need to be able to show all of them. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure I was retyping for a good reason.
For a purpose, so absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
And Dr. Todd, I know this is going to sound like a silly question, so I'm going to preface it with that. And I feel like there was an email or something, but I can't find it, or it's on either your shell or Dr. Todd's shell, that shows us CAAP 2, CAAP 3, the explanation of it, and I can't find it in the email because I know we stop at CAAP 1. So what is it under so I can see those other?
Probably under, let's see, she may have had it when she gave you the agenda for the class a couple of times ago when she first introduced that.
That makes, yeah, I was looking back at emails and I couldn't remember. I feel like I've seen it, but I couldn't remember where I saw it. If it was in an email or if it was in her shell or if it was, when I look at the handbook for 603, it stops at CAAP 1. So it must have been on an agenda. Okay, I'll look back at that.
You can go back and let's see. You have a copy of the handbook. So you can go into the handbook and look at CAAP 2, 3, and 4.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Oh, the original big handbook.
yeah, the big thick handbook. So,
Oh, okay. I bet it is in there, Carrie.
yeah,
Okay. And the real big, and then, okay. All right.
the one that has the
I
whole
might
thing.
have it. I copied all of that off way back in the fall, so I may have that in my binder already, and I didn't even think of that. Okay.
Don't take too much of it because, I mean, the CAAP will be the same. But as far if there's any other assignments or anything in there, don't be messing with
Okay.
that, because we've completely revamped 605 based on the 3-semester program. So
Okay.
it's really basically 2 completely different. It's the same work, but it's in a different sequence. And any assignments like that might be in the shell, you wouldn't want to get them now because she hasn't
Okay.
loaded the new.
But I'll be okay looking ahead at the CAAP 2 and 3 and getting started a little bit on that. Okay.
Because we've been over it. I mean, the 2 is just the survey and the interviews and the looking at the, deciding how to revise your recommendations and strategies, and then
Okay.
skipping on to 3 to do that list of things and the plan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
By the time you get through with this, you'll just know how to do continuous improvement just in your sleep. Just make a plan, right? But you have to do a lot of work before you can do the plan. That's the trick, is you can't find the answer until you find the question. And all 1, 2, and 3, you're building to the plan. You have to do the research and find the data and follow the data in order to make a plan that really is going to make a difference. Yeah. You can't go on what people think they ought to be doing. You got to do it by the data. Anyway, anything else?
One more quick one.
Yeah.
In terms of prompt 1,
Mm-hmm.
the narrative talking about the data, I tend to get a little wordy. I think it's the English teacher in me. If I have like 13 questions that are in a section,
Mm-hmm.
do I need to talk about all 13 of those, or just kind of overview the good and focus in on the 2 lowest?
I think what you do is you say, here's the data, yada, 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 and just, 1 or 2 sentences per, and then you talk about the strengths and weaknesses. And
Okay.
then with the strengths, you can just pull out a few.
Okay.
And then the weaknesses, here's what we need to be focusing on. And, a couple of sentences on each one.
Okay.
But then when you get over there to the recommendations, you want to make sure the recommendations are a paragraph or a subheading for each one. So the evaluator is going to be able to see you've addressed each one. And also, so when you go to the next task, you can look back and say, here it is. This is what I've got to address, because I said this was the recommendation. These are the strategies, okay? Dump them into that plan in that order, just like you had them, and it makes your life easier.
Okay.
Organized people do well in administration. And if you can't, you really need to see the big picture of things and be able to chop it up into little pieces that you can feed to your staff so that you can help them understand the big picture. But you've got to have it. You've got to have a vision of where you're headed. We don't talk much about vision now. I did my dissertation on vision of the high school, and you just have to have a vision, because if you don't know where you want to go, you're not going to get there ever. And so, yeah.
Okay.
Good to me. Okay. I'm going to say,
right.
and I'm just
Thank
hoping that I'm going to cut off this recorder.